The silence at Arlington National Cemetery that morning was absolute, broken only by the soft patter of rain against rows of white marble headstones. Under a gray November sky, they stood in formation. Marines, Navy SEALs, family members, all motionless as the flag-draped casket was carried toward its final resting place. Then came the sound no one expected, a low guttural whine rising to a desperate howl. Apollo, the German shepherd, K9, who had served alongside Navy SEAL Mason Sullivan for 3 tours, suddenly lunged forward with such force that his handler stumbled. The leash snapped taut, then broke free. "Apollo, heel!" Ryan Townsend commanded. But it was too late. Time seemed to freeze as the powerful dog bolted across the wet grass, his military vest gleaming with medals that matched his fallen master's. The honor guard stiffened. Captain Hargrove's face darkened with anger. Abigail Sullivan's hand flew to her mouth. In one fluid motion, Apollo leaped onto Mason's casket, his paws landing on the precisely folded American flag. The collective gasp that followed hung in the air like the raindrops suspended from the funeral tent's edge just before they fell. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Arlington National Cemetery stretched before them like a solemn sea of white markers, each standing at perfect attention as they had for generations. Today, another hero would join their ranks. The late morning rain softened to a gentle mist that clung to the uniforms of the gathered military personnel and settled on the shoulders of grieving family members like a collective weight of sorrow. Mason Sullivan had been more than just a Navy SEAL. At 32, he'd earned 2 Purple Hearts and the Navy Cross for actions his team rarely discussed outside their brotherhood. Standing 6'2" with shoulders built for carrying others' burdens, Mason's fierce exterior had always concealed a compassionate heart. Fellow SEALs spoke of how he'd carry extra supplies for Afghan children, or how he'd volunteer for the most dangerous positions to protect younger team members. Apollo had entered Mason's life 5 years ago during a mission gone sideways in Kandahar province. The team had cleared a compound when Mason discovered the German shepherd puppy, severely malnourished and hiding beneath debris, against regulations. Mason smuggled the dog back to base. "Some rules are meant to be broken," he'd told his commanding officer, who reluctantly allowed it after seeing the bond forming between man and dog. Apollo eventually became an official military canine trained in explosive detection and tracking, serving alongside the man who had saved him. Abby Sullivan stood alone now, her dark hair pulled back, her blue eyes identical to her brother's rimmed red with grief. At 30, she'd already endured more loss than seemed fair. Their mother had passed just 3 months prior after a brief battle with cancer. As an ER doctor, Abby understood death intimately, but understanding didn't ease the pain. Only she knew the secret she carried new life growing within her, a nephew Mason would never meet. Ryan Townsend maintained his military bearing beside Apollo, though his knuckles had turned white gripping the leash. Mason's best friend since Bud's training. Ryan carried the invisible wounds of their last mission and the weight of a promise made between brothers in arms. Captain William Hargrove stood nearby, ramrod straight, a man who believed protocols existed for a reason and who had never quite approved of the latitude given to Mason's unusual K9 companion. The cemetery fell silent as the honor guard approached with measured steps, carrying the flag-draped casket toward its final destination. The funeral procession moved with military precision across the rain-dampened grass of Arlington. 6 Navy SEALs in dress blues carried Mason's casket, their faces impassive despite the burden of grief that weighed far heavier than their physical load. The only sounds were the synchronized footfalls and the quiet sobs of distant relatives who had gathered to pay their respects. Ryan noticed Apollo's behavior changing as the procession approached. The dog's ears had flattened against his head, and a tremor ran through his powerful frame. Earlier that morning, Apollo had refused his breakfast, something he'd never done before. When Ryan had gone to retrieve him from Mason's apartment, he'd found the dog lying on Mason's bed, surrounded by his handler's clothing, whimpering softly into the darkness. "He knows," Ryan had whispered to Abby when they'd arrived at the cemetery. "Dogs always know." The chaplain took his position at the head of the grave, opening his Bible as the casket-bearers positioned themselves. Captain Hargrove stood slightly apart, his jaw tight, watching Apollo with evident disapproval. The dog's training should have kept him motionless at Ryan's side, but Apollo's disciplined demeanor was cracking with each passing moment. Ryan felt the tension building in the leash and placed a steadying hand on Apollo's back. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Stand down." But Apollo's focus remained unbreakably fixed on Mason's casket, his breaths coming quicker now. As the chaplain began to speak of sacrifice and duty, Ryan's mind drifted back to the day Mason had found Apollo. Their unit had been clearing buildings in a small village outside Kandahar when gunfire erupted from a nearby alley. After neutralizing the threat, Mason had noticed movement beneath a pile of rubble. Expecting another combatant, they'd approached with weapons raised, only to find a tiny, dust-covered puppy with intelligent eyes that seemed to look straight through them. "Leave it, Sullivan," their team leader had ordered. "We're not running a rescue operation." But Mason had already removed his tactical gloves, reaching out to the trembling animal. "Sir, with respect, I think this little guy's family was collateral damage. We can't just leave him to die." Against regulations and against reason, Mason had tucked the puppy into his pack, feeding him rations from his own meals until they returned to base. The inevitable reprimand never came. Their commanding officer had taken one look at the bond forming between the SEAL and the dog and recognized something special. "He'll be your responsibility, Sullivan," he'd said gruffly, "and God help you if he compromises a mission." But Apollo never had. If anything, he'd proven himself invaluable, detecting improvised explosives that technology had missed and tracking hostiles through terrain that had confounded even the most experienced operators. Ryan felt Apollo tense again, stronger this time. The dog's focus had intensified, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly from mourning to alert readiness, as if Mason might suddenly sit up and issue a command. The leash grew taut between them as the chaplain continued his solemn address to the gathered mourners. What happened next occurred so quickly that Ryan would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. One moment, Apollo was trembling beside him, and the next, the leash snapped taut with such force that it tore from Ryan's grip. The German shepherd lunged forward with the power and precision that had made him legendary among special operations K9 units. "Apollo, no," Ryan shouted, but his command fell on deaf ears. The honor guard stiffened as Apollo raced past them, a streak of tan and black against the cemetery's somber backdrop. With a single powerful leap, he landed atop Mason's flag-draped casket, his paws disturbing the perfect folds of the American flag. A collective gasp rose from the mourners, followed by a stunned silence that seemed to stretch across the entire cemetery. Captain Hargrove was the first to react. his face flushing crimson as he stepped forward. "This is completely unacceptable," he snapped, reaching for Apollo's collar. "Get this animal under control immediately." The dog responded with a low, warning growl, not aggressive, but determined. He positioned himself protectively over the center of the casket, directly above where Mason's heart would be. "Sir, wait," Ryan intervened, stepping between Hargrove and the casket. "Please, just give him a moment. This is a military funeral. Townsend, not a dog park," Hargrove hissed. "I don't care what Sullivan allowed in the field. Here, we maintain standards." Abby moved forward then, her grief momentarily eclipsed by concern for the animal her brother had loved. "Captain," she said softly but firmly, "my brother would have wanted Apollo here. Please." The chaplain, sensing the tension, laid a gentle hand on Hargrove's shoulder. "Perhaps," he suggested quietly, "we might extend the same grace to this animal that he showed to his handler in life." Hargrove's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, visibly struggling with his sense of decorum and the unexpected tableau before him. In the momentary calm that followed, Ryan knelt beside Abby, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you should know about how it happened. Mason didn't die during the operation." Abby turned to him, confusion clouding her features. "What do you mean the officer said it was an IED during the extraction?" Ryan shook his head, pain etching new lines around his eyes. "The mission was complete. We were loading up to pull out when Mason heard a child crying in a building we'd cleared. Intelligence had warned about secondary devices, but he went back in anyway." Ryan's voice cracked slightly. "He found a little girl, couldn't have been more than 5, hiding in a closet. He'd just handed her off to me when the second explosion hit, the one that was meant for all of us." Tears spilled freely down Abby's cheeks now. "He went back in, knowing the risk." Ryan nodded, watching as Apollo settled on the casket, his head now resting on his paws, eyes alert but calmer. That was Mason, always putting others first. Protocols be damned. He glanced pointedly at Hargrove. "The official report lists him as killed during operational activities. Technically true, but it misses the heart of who your brother was." Apollo remained atop the casket, steadfast and unmoving, a guardian unwilling to abandon his post, unwilling to believe that his partner was truly gone. A tense silence fell over the gathering as all eyes focused on Apollo, still maintaining his position atop Mason's casket. The German shepherd's ears remained alert, his posture somehow both protective and mournful. The rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to his fur like tears that couldn't fall. "We need to proceed with the ceremony," Captain Hargrove insisted, his voice lower but no less rigid. "This disruption has gone on long enough." Several of Mason's SEAL teammates exchanged glances. Chief Petty Officer Martinez stepped forward, his weathered face set in firm lines. "Sir, with all due respect, that dog saved more lives in our unit than some of our best technology. He deserves to say goodbye his way." "This isn't about the dog's service record," Hargrove countered. "This is about military protocol and the dignity of a fallen sailor." Abby stepped between them, her grief momentarily channeled into resolve. "My brother broke protocol to save that little girl, Captain, and he broke protocol the day he rescued Apollo. Her voice trembled but held firm. "Maybe some protocols are worth breaking when something more important is at stake." The small crowd of mourners had begun to murmur, uncomfortable with the debate unfolding amidst what should have been a solemn ceremony. The chaplain cleared his throat, seeking middle ground. "Perhaps we might continue the service with Apollo present. After all, he served alongside Petty Officer Sullivan." Ryan watched the exchange while keeping a watchful eye on Apollo. The dog had settled now, his body stretched protectively across the flag, his eyes never leaving the casket beneath him. To anyone who knew military working dogs, it was clear Apollo was standing guard, maintaining watch over his partner one last time. As the debate quieted, Ryan's mind drifted to Afghanistan, to the day Apollo had saved Mason's life. They had been on a reconnaissance mission in the mountains near the Pakistan border, moving through territory known to be heavily mined. Apollo had been ranging ahead when he suddenly froze, his posture signaling danger. When Mason approached, Apollo had physically blocked his path, nudging him backward with unexpected force. The IED, they later discovered, was sophisticated enough that their detection equipment had missed it entirely. Apollo's instincts had saved not just Mason, but the entire squad that day. "He's earned this right," Ryan said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Abby stood beside him, her hand occasionally brushing tears from her cheeks. In just 3 months, she had lost her mother to cancer, and now her brother to war. At 30, she found herself completely alone, except for the life growing inside her that no one yet knew about. A life that would never know its uncle, a man who had been larger than life itself. "Mason was my rock," she whispered to Ryan. "After Mom died, he called me every day from overseas. Even when he couldn't tell me where he was or what he was doing, he just checked in, made sure I was okay." Her voice broke. "Who does that from a war zone?" The chaplain, seeing that tensions had eased somewhat, began to continue the service, speaking of duty, honor, and sacrifice. As his words flowed over the gathering, Apollo remained still, occasionally scanning the mourners as if taking inventory, ensuring everyone important to Mason was accounted for. Ryan noticed Captain Hargrove had stepped back, his posture still stiff, but his expression softening almost imperceptibly as he watched Apollo maintain his vigil. Even the most hardened military mind could recognize devotion when confronted with it so plainly. The gathered SEALs shared quiet stories among themselves, tales of Mason's humor in the darkest moments, his uncanny ability to find water in desert terrain, how he would always take the most dangerous position to shield newer team members. And through each story, Apollo's ears would twitch, as if recognizing his partner in the words being spoken, in the memories being shared. As the formal part of the service approached, the honor guard prepared to fold the flag. They hesitated, unsure how to proceed with Apollo still positioned atop the casket. The honor guard stood at attention, their white gloves stark against their dress uniforms, waiting for instructions on how to proceed with Apollo still maintaining his position. After a brief consultation, the senior officer nodded toward Ryan, silently requesting his assistance. Ryan approached the casket slowly, speaking in low tones meant only for Apollo's ears. "Apollo, shift," he commanded gently, using one of Mason's training signals. The German shepherd's eyes met Ryan's, an intelligence and sorrow in them that seemed almost human. After a moment's hesitation, Apollo carefully repositioned himself at the foot of the casket, allowing the honor guard access while still maintaining his protective presence. With practiced precision, the guard began the solemn ritual of folding the American flag. Each crease and turn was executed with perfect reverence, transforming the draped fabric into a tight triangle of stars and stripes. Apollo watched the process with alert attention, as if understanding the significance of each movement. The cemetery fell silent, save for the occasional call of a distant bird and the whisper of a breeze through the trees. Even Captain Hargrove stood respectfully still, his earlier objections apparently set aside in the face of the ceremony's gravity. As the honor guard completed the flag folding, Ryan reached into his pocket and withdrew something that caught the weak sunlight: Mason's dog tags. These weren't his official tags, which would remain with him, but the unofficial set that many SEALs carried, the ones that bore not just name, rank, and service number, but also personal reminders of why they fought. Ryan knelt beside Apollo and carefully slipped the chain over the dog's head, adjusting it to rest alongside Apollo's official military tags. "He'd want you to have these, boy," he whispered. The rifle detail took position at a distance, preparing for the 21-gun salute. As the first volley cracked across the cemetery, Apollo remained steady, not flinching at the sound so similar to the battlefield conditions he'd been trained to endure. 7 rifles fired 3 times, the reports echoing across Arlington's hallowed ground. It was during the second volley that Ryan noticed Apollo's attention shift. The dog's gaze had fixed on someone standing at the back of the gathered mourners, a middle-aged man in a civilian suit who seemed somehow out of place among the military personnel and family members. The man stood with one hand unconsciously pressed against his chest, his expression a complex mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Ryan didn't recognize him, but Apollo's focus was unwavering. By the third volley, Apollo had straightened to full attention, his posture reminiscent of how he would stand when Mason gave commands. The bugler stepped forward next, raising his instrument to his lips. The first clear, piercing note of taps drifted across the cemetery, a melody that had bid farewell to fallen soldiers for over a century. As the hauntingly beautiful tune continued, Abby's composure finally broke. She sobbed openly, leaning against Ryan for support. At the final notes of taps, Apollo did something that sent shivers through everyone present. He lifted his head and released a single, mournful howl that perfectly matched the bugler's last note, their sounds intertwining in the crisp autumn air before fading to silence. Then, with deliberate movements, Apollo placed his right paw directly on the casket and held it there in what could only be described as a final salute. Even Captain Hargrove seemed affected, blinking rapidly and looking away. The honor guard, maintaining their professional demeanor, nevertheless exchanged glances of amazement. The man at the back of the crowd pressed his hand more firmly against his chest, tears now streaming freely down his face. As the senior officer approached Abby with the folded flag, Apollo finally stepped down from the casket, moving to sit at attention beside it. The officer knelt before Abby, presenting the flag with the traditional words of condolence. "On behalf of the President of the United States Navy, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." The cemetery emptied slowly after the ceremony concluded. Mourners departed in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing back at Abby, Ryan, and Apollo, who remained beside the casket. The pallbearers had withdrawn, waiting at a respectful distance for the family's final moments before Mason would be lowered into the ground, a process too painful for many to witness, too. Captain Hargrove approached Abby, his military bearing softened slightly by the ceremony they had just experienced. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, clearing his throat, "I want to extend my personal condolences. Your brother was an exceptional sailor." "Thank you, Captain," Abby replied, her voice hollow with exhaustion. Hargrove's gaze shifted to Apollo, who sat motionless beside the casket. "Regarding the K-9," he continued, his tone shifting to something more official, "protocol dictates that he return to active duty. We have several handlers who would be suitable—" "No," Abby interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Apollo comes home with me." Ryan tensed beside her, recognizing the conflict about to unfold. Apollo was military property, technically speaking, despite the bond he had shared with Mason. "Ms. Sullivan, I understand this is a difficult time, but Apollo is a highly trained military asset. His skills are needed in the field." Abby straightened, squaring her shoulders despite her grief. "My brother raised him from a puppy. They've never been separated. And now—" Her voice faltered momentarily. "Captain, there's something you should know. I'm pregnant. Mason's nephew will be born in 5 months, and he'll never meet his uncle. Apollo is the only connection my child will have to Mason." The revelation hung in the air between them. Ryan placed a supportive hand on Abby's shoulder, confirming the truth of her statement with a small nod. Hargrove appeared genuinely surprised. "He didn't know? I only found out 2 weeks ago," Abby said softly. "I was waiting until he got home to tell him in person." The captain's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted. "I'll need to consult with command," he said finally. "There are protocols." "With all respect, sir," Ryan interjected, "Mason Sullivan saved more lives than we can count. Maybe we owe him this one thing." Hargrove departed without further comment, leaving the issue unresolved. In the days that followed, Apollo's condition deteriorated rapidly. He refused food, lost weight, and spent hours lying on Mason's bed at Abby's apartment, surrounded by his handler's belongings that still carried his scent. "It's like he's given up," Abby told Ryan one evening a week after the funeral. "The vet says there's nothing physically wrong with him. He's just heartbroken." Ryan nodded grimly. He understood the feeling all too well. The nightmares had returned with a vengeance since Mason's death. Vivid replays of that final mission where he'd watched his best friend disappear into the building seconds before it erupted in flames and debris. The guilt was a constant companion, the questions relentless: could he have stopped him? Should he have gone instead? "I should have been the one," Ryan said quietly, watching Apollo's listless form on Mason's bed. "He had you, had a future. I was just—" "Don't." Abby cut him off sharply. "Mason made his own choices. He always did." The heart recipient, a man named Thomas Wheeler, had approached Abby briefly after the funeral, stammering through tears that he couldn't find words adequate to express his gratitude. The doctors had told him he had weeks to live before Mason's heart became available. He'd left his card, asking her to call if she ever wanted to talk, then disappeared before she could process the encounter. On the 7th day after the funeral, something changed in Apollo. Abby had fallen asleep on the couch after a grueling hospital shift, only to be awakened by a wet nose pressing insistently against her hand. Apollo stood before her, alert in a way she hadn't seen since before Mason's death. his tail not quite wagging, but held at attention. "What is it, boy?" she asked groggily. Sitting up and checking the time said it was just past dawn, the apartment bathed in soft morning light. Apollo paced to the door, then back to Abby, his intent unmistakable. When she didn't immediately respond, he gave a short, sharp bark, the first sound he'd made in days. Okay, Abby conceded, reaching for her coat. "Let me get dressed." She texted Ryan, who arrived 20 minutes later. Concern etched on his tired face. "Is everything all right?" he asked, eyeing Apollo's unexpected animation. "I'm not sure," Abby admitted. "He wants to go somewhere. Won't settle down." They followed Apollo, who led them with surprising purpose through Arlington National Cemetery. The morning was crisp, dew still clinging to the grass between the headstones. Few visitors were present at this early hour, giving their unusual procession a sense of privacy. Apollo moved with confidence past Mason's fresh grave. Continuing to a massive oak tree about 50 yards away, at the base of the tree, he began to dig with focused determination. "Apollo! No!" Ryan commanded, alarmed at the dog digging in the National Cemetery. But Apollo persisted until his paws struck something solid. Ryan knelt beside the shallow hole, brushing away soil to reveal a small waterproof tactical case, the kind special operators use to protect sensitive items in the field. "He buried this here," Ryan said incredulously, lifting the case. "Mason must have shown him where—" Abby's hands trembled as Ryan handed her the case. Inside was a sealed envelope with "For my nephew" written in Mason's distinctive handwriting, a small Navy SEAL trident pin, several family photographs, and a folded piece of paper simply labeled Apollo in block letters. Tears blurred Abby's vision. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow, he knew about the baby." Ryan opened the note meant for Apollo, a sad smile touching his lips as he read, "It says Apollo, mission complete. Stand down, faithful friend. Your new assignment, watch over them both." He looked up at Abby. "He knew you'd take Apollo. He planned for it." As Abby clutched the letter for her unborn child to her chest, Ryan slowly unbuttoned his shirt collar, revealing Mason's ID tags hanging alongside his own. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Mason and I made a pact after our third tour. If anything happened to either of us, the other would look after their family, wear their tags as a reminder." His voice grew rough with emotion. "I'm not trying to replace him, Abby, but I promised him I'd be there for you both." Before Abby could respond, they noticed someone approaching Thomas Wheeler, the heart recipient, looking uncertain but determined. "I'm sorry to intrude," he began awkwardly. "I've been visiting the grave every morning. I can't explain it, but it helps somehow." He looked down at Apollo with wonder. "The strange thing is, this is the first time the dog has acknowledged me." Apollo had indeed risen from his sitting position and was now standing directly in front of Wheeler, his head tilted slightly, studying the man with intent focus. "He recognizes something in you," Ryan said quietly. "Something familiar." Wheeler placed his hand over his heart, Mason's heart, in an unconscious gesture. "The doctors told me it's impossible," he said quietly. "But sometimes I swear I can feel memories that aren't mine, dreams of deserts and mountains I've never seen." 6 months later, The quiet beeping of hospital monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop as Abby held her newborn son, Mason Sullivan, Jr., had his uncle's eyes the same piercing blue that seemed to take in everything at once. Ryan stood beside the bed, his normally stoic expression softened by the tiny life before him. "He looks just like him," Ryan said softly, gently touching the baby's hand. The infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He does," Abby agreed, tears of joy mingling with the lingering sadness that never quite faded. Same determined chin, too. Outside the hospital room, Apollo waited patiently in the hallway, special permission having been granted for the now famous military dog to be present. In the months since the funeral, Apollo's story had spread throughout the military community and beyond. A photograph of him saluting Mason's casket had appeared in newspapers nationwide, touching hearts and opening conversations about the bonds formed in service. Captain Hargrove had ultimately relented on Apollo's reassignment, influenced not only by public sentiment, but by his own grudging recognition of something beyond military protocol. He'd arrived at Abby's apartment 2 weeks after the funeral, paperwork in hand. "Officially, Apollo is being reassigned to civilian service dog duty," he'd stated formally. "Unofficially, he's going home where he belongs." Before leaving, he'd added quietly, "Your brother was extraordinary, Ms. Sullivan. So is his dog." Apollo had gradually transformed in the months that followed. With Ryan's guidance, he'd begun training as a therapy dog for veterans suffering from PTSD. 3 days a week, Apollo accompanied Ryan to the VA hospital, where his calm presence helped soldiers navigate the invisible wounds of war. The dog, who had once detected explosives, now sensed emotional minefields, gently guiding veterans through their darkest moments. Thomas Wheeler had become an unexpected friend, joining Abby and Ryan for dinner once a month. He never claimed to have Mason's memories or thoughts that would have crossed a line into the impossible, but he spoke of a newfound appreciation for life, an urgency to make his second chance meaningful. He'd started a foundation to support military families who had lost loved ones in service. "Your brother saved more than just that little girl," he told Abby. "He's still saving people through what he inspires in others." Now, as Nurse took baby Mason for his first checkup, Ryan helped Abby pack her overnight bag. "The nursery's all ready," he assured her. "Apollo's been sleeping beside the crib every night this week." When they arrived home the following day, they found something neither could explain. Mason's old SEAL Team scarf, which Abby had carefully packed away in a storage box months ago, was somehow laid across the baby's crib, neatly folded. "Did you?" Abby began, but Ryan shook his head, equally puzzled. Apollo sat beside the crib, his posture alert but peaceful, watching over his new charge with the same devotion he'd shown his former handler. That evening, after Abby had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's events, Ryan sat in the nursery rocking chair with baby Mason. Apollo rested his head on Ryan's knee, eyes fixed on the sleeping infant. "I found something else," Ryan whispered to the dog. A voice recording Mason made before that last deployment never showed it to Abby, thought it might be too much. He stroked Apollo's head gently. "The last thing he said was meant for you. Tell Apollo I'll wait for him at the Rainbow Bridge." Apollo's ears perked up slightly at his name, his deep brown eyes meeting Ryan's. "You did good, boy," Ryan continued softly. "Mission complete, but a new one's just beginning." Outside, Stars appeared one by one in the clear night sky. In the quiet nursery, as a new life slept peacefully under the watchful eyes of those who had loved and lost together, there was a palpable sense that some bonds never truly break, they merely transform, connecting past to future in an unending circle of love and loyalty. In the twilight of our lives, we recognize that true devotion transcends even death's cold finality. Apollo's story reminds us of what America was built upon: unwavering loyalty, selfless sacrifice, and the sacred bonds that connect generations. As you've watched your children grow and perhaps buried dear friends along the way, you understand that Apollo's grief isn't just a dog's tale. It's our shared human experience of loving deeply and letting go. Mason's final act, saving a child he never knew, echoes the selflessness your generation has always valued, putting duty above self without expectation of recognition. When Apollo placed his paw on that flag-draped casket, he spoke for all of us who've stood silently at gravesides, wishing for one more moment with those we've lost. Yet, in baby Mason's eyes, we find the continuation of life's precious journey, the torch passed to new hands. Remember how Apollo found purpose again through service to others. There's wisdom there for all of us. The twilight years needn't be defined by losses counted, but by love bestowed and legacies nurtured. Some connections never die, they simply wait for us at our own rainbow bridge, where reunions await beyond mortal understanding. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.